In the Big Biller Summit Series 2010, Mark Whitby interviews Mike Walmsley. Now, I've got some of Mike's other product, and it's pretty good, but this particular presentation was awesome. He called it Making Business Winning Easier. Now, some of this I'm actually going to read out verbatim because for me to try and praise here, something will get lost in translation, so forgive me if I read it. Not all of it, though. Mike says, "Every day I see recruiters sitting at the desk and trying to work out who to call next. And quite often there's a lot of wasted time and inefficiency in the process. And for me, the best recruiters are more opportunistic than other recruiters. They collect information throughout the day that takes them to business. And it's a much simpler job than most people actually make it. And I suppose what I want to do today is give you a hint of how two recruiters with the same experience, with the same market, are having a very, very different level of income. One recruiter is earning 5 or 10 times more than the other recruiter, with the same candidates, the same clients, the same economy. And what Mike's trying to do is actually give us the tips that he sees as the difference between these two people. And he sums it all up in targeted sales information. He calls it TSI. And whilst a lot of people are using databases and they're using the internet, which is great, they're not actually using other resources that are at their fingertips. He would suggest to start with that people actually read a decent quality newspaper. He calls it a boring newspaper, or a boring e-zine, so maybe the Financial Times, the Guardian, the Telegraph, rather than, as he calls it, a fun newspaper. So what Mike does is he starts to try and get us to think about the kind of companies that we really want to work with. Do we want to go for the blue chips where they've got PSLs in place, where the charges, the margins have been driven down? Or do we want to deal with SME companies where we deal with owner managers, directors, people that can actually say yes, that you can have a dialogue with, people that you can actually engage with? And to this extent, he suggests that we start with the CV. Now, every day, if we're recruiting, we're either face-to-face or on the telephone with real-life people who've had real-life jobs. And what he suggests we do, and he labours this point, but very well, is we ask a question: who do you report to? And he would suggest that we ask this question 20, 30, 40 times a day. For as many employers a candidate has actually had, we should ask that question. And even after training, he says that people often don't carry this through. They do it on occasion. But he would suggest that we do this on a regular basis. Whether you're looking at the temporary market or the permanent market, this always applies. And he says the difference between top billers and average billers is the way they get this information. And he uses a sheet with about half a dozen columns. He'll have the date, the name of the candidate, the job they came in for, and then the company or companies they worked at before, and the name of the hiring manager, and ideally some more intel about how many staff they have got within that department. And Mike goes into this in a lot of detail. And of course, you can start using this as a real prompter to ring in organisations that aren't on your database, that you haven't yet researched on the internet. He also says finding out whether these organisations are actually on everybody else's radar. Most people, if you talk about the kind of companies they want to recruit for, they'll come up with Virgin or HMV or Microsoft or LinkedIn. But of course, everybody's after those companies. Mike suggests that we go for the boring firms, the people that are not yet really high profile. If you can imagine, if you're living in America and you'd approached Apple 20 years ago, when Steve Jobs was working out of his garage, just at the point where they're starting to recruit, then you'd have had a great opportunity to recruit temporary and permanent staff. And if we think about most of our recruitment assignments, they tend to come in blocks. A company will recruit 2 or 3 people over a 6-month period and they'll be very quiet for another year or so, and then they're recruiting again. And likewise, temps for projects. It'll often be more than just one temp. It might be 2 or 3 people with different disciplines within the same department. He also talks about getting a verbal reference. Now, we can do a whole training session on verbal referencing, but he suggests that we really got to dig deep and speak to the previous employer, the manager, the person that actually employed this candidate, to find exactly how they got on. And it's an easy way of getting past the gatekeeper, isn't it? You know, the objection is, why are you calling? I'm calling from Orchard. Well, why are you calling? Well, actually, I'm ringing because I want to speak to your boss about somebody that used to work with him. Might even want to give the name if you feel that confidence. That's going to get you through every single time. Now, of course, you might not get a fantastic reference, but nonetheless, by asking that information, you're going to get through, and that might lead into a conversation with that hiring manager about whether they might be interested in talking to us about our recruitment services. He also talks about the way of selling a candidate into a company that they've worked at before, particularly when you've actually had a really good, strong, positive reference or background report for them. Obviously, you don't want to do it if you know that they were kicked out, or they were struggling, or they underperformed at that organisation. But if they have done very well, you've got an opportunity to sell them back in. Now, Mike's really clear about the conversation. He says that we've got to get the phraseology right, because if you did say, Jim, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ring XYZ company and see if they've got any vacancies there for you, it's a bit fluffy, and also the candidate might well do it themselves and you'd lose out. What Mike suggests we say is, if we pick up a position at XYZ company, how interested would you be in working there again? And of course, if the candidate says, yes, I'd like to work there again, fantastic. It's a no-brainer. You pick up the phone, you've got a good background report already, a good reference. You then ring that hiring manager and say that you've just interviewed so-and-so, and actually you know full well they'd like to work at that company again. He also talks about asking people about the previous companies they've worked at and finding out whether or not they've actually told the boss they're looking to leave. Now, most times, of course, they haven't. They're still working there, they're doing it on the quiet. But sometimes, Mike suggests 1 in 15 times, the employee has actually told the employer they're looking to make a move. Well, that's a great opportunity for you. The vacancy might not have yet gone live, you've got the inside track. Great opportunity for you to make a contact call. When you start talking to candidates about where they've been for interview, you've got to be very careful. A couple of years ago, we could get them to give us all the information about where they've been for interview, and quite frankly, today they're now pretty wise to it. What Mike suggested we do is we start talking about where have you been for interview, not in terms of the name of the company, but in terms of the role. What did they like about the role? What didn't they like? What was it about the company culture? And out of that, you could say, oh, what was the company called? Well, it was XYZ. Oh, was it Terry Smith that you interviewed with? No, it was John Brown. That helps you get the inside track, but you're going at it slightly more gently rather than saying, so where have you been for interview? Also, ask the candidate whether they've looked internally for another position. Now, they might say, yes, I did apply for an internal position, but I didn't get the job, or it was unsuitable for any number of reasons, or maybe they were offered a position internally after they handed their notice in. So they might have turned it down. That, again, is a great way of you getting inside track information into a real opportunity. He also talks about developing relationships with people. Now, these are often candidates that you're going to meet. They might be people that you place, they might not be, but start to think about people that can influence your earning ability. This might sound a little bit Machiavellian, but nonetheless, the people that I spend time with invariably are now people that I met through my business, people I've been on holiday with, people I've spent a lot of time with, people that put money in my pocket, but who have a great personal relationship with them. So get to know some people, take them for lunch, get to know more about them, not just their business. Because, of course, people do business with people they like. The next technique, which I loved, and I never heard this before, was if you're interviewing somebody who is at manager level, you start talking to them about how they built their team, how they recruited, what experience they had with other recruiters. And often there will be not fantastic experiences. And you make a note of it. You don't pounce and say, well, we're great at this stage. But at the end of the interview, you simply say, so, Mr. Candidate, as a hiring manager, you're now on the other side of the desk. I'm curious, How did we do? How was our recruitment process? Did I interview you well? Did I get the information out of you? And do I know what you're looking for now? Now, of course, if you've had a positive interview and your candidate, the hiring manager, says, actually, you've been brilliant, well, then there's an opportunity for you to say, well, I'm interested. Is there an opportunity for us to work with you before you leave your organisation? Not always, but often there'll come up an opportunity for you to actually make a placement, temporary or a faster permanent position than you would do normally, because you've got the hiring manager in front of you. Now, he also talks about the sellback concept, which actually I've talked about before, so forgive me, but this is it. This is the last one. Morale within an organisation. Ask your candidate and your previous company, what was morale like? If they start talking about, well, actually it wasn't very good, 5 people left within the last 3 months, there's a good opportunity for you to identify that that is a company that's got some staffing problems. It might be worth making a call. You've got to be a little bit delicate to establish exactly what the dramas are within that organisation. So there you go. Some great tips from Mike Walmsley. I suggest you listen to the CD, but also get hold of the transcript, have a read. There's some really good stuff in there.